Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Jack Slack. I write for Fightland.com. I used to write for Bloody Elbow and Bleacher Report before that. And what I do is write about fights. What I don't do so often is talk about fights, because typically it takes me a long while to get anything I want to say said. But today I will be working from a script, or at least prompts, and I will be trying to edit out all of the crap and mess-ups in between, except the ones that are funny, which I'll leave in. The podcast is a new medium for me. I don't normally operate in the audio. Like most people, I hate the sound of my own voice, and I don't feel very comfortable working without space within which I can expand upon my thoughts. It's very difficult when people want, give us 120 words, Jack, on why so-and-so will win and how they'll win. And that's fucking magic to me, because I have no idea how that's done. What I can do, though, is give you a good outline of how both McGregor and Diaz typically fight, how those styles have historically been bested by other fighters, both on those men and by other men in the past who fought in similar styles. Because while combinations of skills change, and you might find that now you suddenly have an amazing wrestler who can kick like Bill Wallace or something like that, the actual skills themselves are as old as time. There's always been someone around to diffuse whatever your favourite fighter's favourite technique or method is. You just have to go back, find it, work out why it worked. One of the most important things to talk about in the McGregor-Diaz matchup, of course, is the size difference. Obviously, there are a lot of people who are in the I hate people who cut a lot of weight camp. It was the same with John Jones. People go, oh, he's a heavyweight beating up light heavyweights, even when he was beating up, Daniel Cormier, who was a successful heavyweight. But Conor McGregor had his best success as a featherweight, fighting featherweights, even if he was a big featherweight. Nate Diaz has been up to welterweight. He was moderately successful there. A lot of us will remember when he was ragdolled by Rory MacDonald, but Rory MacDonald can do that to most welterweights on the planet. Nate Diaz is certainly at his best at lightweight, which makes it even more frustrating that this match is being fought at 170 pounds again, because if McGregor wins, it will be, I reckon he can hang with the real welterweights, and if McGregor loses, it will be, well, he fought a welterweight. Neither of which will actually be true following this fight. If he loses, he lost to a lightweight at a weird weight that they agreed on. And if he wins, he beat a lightweight. So he moves up the rankings at lightweight. He's not fought a proper welterweight. But that's, weight matters are just one of the most annoying things about combat sports. We have the weight classes so that we don't have to see Demetrius Johnson get the snot beaten out of him by people like Donald Cerrone. But equally, then we have all this arguing about 5 pounds weight this way and that way, and who could go up, who will go down. And props to Conor McGregor, because he is, one of the very few who has actually, at the top of his game, said, I'm going up a weight class, and actually done it. Firstly, what I want to talk about is the role of reach and weight. Those are the big factors in a size difference. You can talk about strength and hitting power, but those are more nebulous ideas. We've all seen 145-pound men who can seemingly starch people with ease, and they'll go up in weight, and then they'll keep starching people. And we've all seen, Frankie Edgar is a fantastic example. He could probably make the bantamweight limit if he really wanted to, but he's been in there, in the clinch wrestling with dudes who were 155 pounds. Obviously he is disproportionately strong for his size. What size does mean is reach and weight. The bigger man will always have a weight advantage, and he will often have a reach or range advantage. So on the subject of reach and weight, we'll start with reach, which is a confusing one because what we mean when we say reach is actually range, rather than the length of the arm. Joe Rogan obviously argued for measuring the legs and getting leg reach, but what we're actually talking about is height and reach combined, because those two aspects produce range. I have written down here height plus reach equals range, but obviously it's not an actual formula. Well, maybe you could work it out to be. Maths nerds in the audience, get on that in the comments below, please. But basically, your reach is at its greatest directly in front of your shoulder. If you stand in front of a wall, sort of side on, put your hand out level with your shoulder so that your fingertips just touch the wall. If you move it up or down a couple of inches, or a couple of degrees rather, you'll see that you lose a little bit of reach. You won't be touching the wall anymore. And this is how height plays into range. Your jab will be at its absolute best against an opponent who is just short enough that the main target, their face, is going to be just in front of your shoulder. Even if you're an exceptionally tall man, you've got a huge height advantage on your opponent, what you'll find is to punch at the optimum range, you'll have to lower your stance a bit, or widen your legs, to get your shoulder level with the target. So for a fighter who likes his jab, has a really good jab, the perfect opponent is someone who is just a few inches shorter, just right in front of the shoulder. You can just throw your arm straight out, get the optimum reach on it, and they're never going to hit you in return. If you keep the jab out there, if you're doing it right, in a perfect world, obviously there will be cock-ups, foul-ups, you'll miss, and on those occasions that you miss or are forced to miss, that is when the shorter man can get to work with his own things. Obviously, another advantage of height within the range fight, or reach fight, or whatever you want to call it. But what you'll see quite often is men with an equal reach, but one will be a couple of inches taller, and that will, in the fight, work out to look like a reach advantage, because it's a range advantage. One man is punching up, one man is punching level with his shoulder. Punching up is a fantastic way to get yourself tired out. A great example from like the conflict mediation world is shot counters. At least here in the UK, shot counters will often, the floor underneath them will be raised. The man who is working in the shop will be higher than the customer. Part of that is the whole talking down to people thing, and part of it is just so that if someone tries to swing at you over the counter, they've got a pretty poor chance of actually connecting. I don't put a lot of faith in interviews with people who have just been hit in the head really hard. That's probably my pet peeve with fighting, is interviewing the man who's just been knocked out or wobbled. But you will remember that Conor McGregor himself said that he'd wasted a lot of energy, or whatever it was, and a lot of that was swinging either up or at a very long range for Nate Diaz as he was leaning back. Conor McGregor was really having to struggle to make up that range disparity in the two of them, which was partly because of his use almost exclusively of his rear hand, which we'll talk about in a minute. Another way that range is affected by what the fighter does in the fight is depending on how bladed his stance is. A squarer stance, your jab is going to be going out in front of you. A more narrow stance, as in lengthways, a more bladed stance we tend to call them, your jab is going to be going almost out to the side of you. And the ideal jabbing position for something like boxing, where you don't have to worry about being kicked in the leg and so on, is almost side on. Of course, the downside of that is that it puts distance between your rear hand and the opponent, so you've got further to travel with your second punch if you want to throw combinations. But for just pure jabbing, almost side on is optimum range. We can apply this to kickers too. They're think of a typical Nak Muay, Muay Thai fighter, someone who likes using their lead leg to push kick from a squarer stance, and then compare them to maybe Samart, who liked to throw almost a side-on, sort of almost side-kick teep, or Neb, I forget. Some angry Nak Muay will have a go at me in the comments, I'm sure. And then compare that again to the Bill Wallace sort of style fighter, side-on in like the horse stance, with the side kick, the D side, the defensive side kick, and how that comes out almost straight from the hip. That's a full leg length between you and the opponent, plus the length from your hip to your spine. That extra few inches. It's the same thing with the jab. The extra inch extra inch or two across the shoulder to the head. That's extra reach. If your shoulder is square with your head, or pulled back a bit, that's range lost. Whereas if your shoulder is pushed out there and you're side on, that's range won. So the point of bringing this up was to talk about mitigating a reach advantage, or the opponent's reach advantage. There are a few methods of doing this. The most commonly repeated one is to crowd him, get on the inside, and the most famous example of that, of course, is Mike Tyson. Tyson would create pressure on the opponent to punch at him with his aggression and his constant movement, and by always being in motion with his head, or what was it, Customato used to call it, evasive aggression or elusive aggression, something like that. Great phrase. but by constantly moving his head, when the punches did come, he wasn't so much reacting to them as just he was probably going to be out of the way anyway. And as soon as, you start missing jabs, all you're really doing is offering openings. So it'd be the right hand over the top of the jab, the famous cross counter, or it'd be a dip down low and come up with the left hook, and then eventually they'd be at the ropes, and Tyson would start with his famous, the little shift off to 90 degrees, the Tyson shift, into the southpaw stance with the right uppercut through the middle. Love that. Or Tyson's lever, the right hook to the body, right uppercut. He didn't really do an awful lot of things on the inside. He wasn't so much an inside fighter as folks remember. What Tyson really did well was hit people in the gap between their long range and close range. When opponents covered up on the ropes, he was happy to wail away. But even Larry Holmes, old man Larry, tied Tyson up quite effectively for 3 or 4 rounds before he got blasted. Tyson wasn't so much an in-fighter. He was more that middle range, that exchanging range. What Jack Dempsey called what did he call it? I can't even remember what he called it. But he used to say, if you are in the range where you can land your right hand, you should always be throwing your hands. That exchanging range. Going on from Tyson, a second way of mitigating a reach disadvantage, which Tyson used and Joe Frazier used a great deal, is to convince the opponent to punch down. Archie Moore also used this. He'd cross his arms in that cross-arm guard, and he'd crouch down real low and bend over at the waist, and these heavyweights would come up, stand over him, and start trying to punch down on his head. And as soon as you're punching down, not only are you giving up your reach advantage, as we discussed earlier, any few inches down from your shoulder is giving up reach, but you are also, it's putting distance between your guard and your chin when your hands are down by the opponent's head when he's crouched. So Archie Moore was, 40-something years, 100 years old, 138 years old, and he was knocking out these young heavyweights while he was dyeing his hair with boot polish, And he basically did it just by covering up, cowering almost, and they'd throw some punches against his guard, they'd think they were getting the better of him, and then suddenly he'd come up with the left hook, or he'd dig a left hook in the liver, which obviously all heavyweights hate. And it was a great trick, worked for a very long time. I think it was his last fight. Was his last fight against Muhammad Ali? Well, Cassius Clay at the time. He coached Cassius Clay for a brief while, and they really didn't see eye to eye. So when he took his last fight against Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali, as he became, Ali was committing the cardinal sin of punching down, but he was just so quick he could get away with it. He was chopping these hands down on almost the back of Moore's head. It was really impressive. But then when Muhammad Ali got in with Joe Frazier, and Joe Frazier got close to him, put him on the ropes, Muhammad Ali was still dropping his hands to punch down at Joe Frazier's head, or really dropping his hands and loading up the uppercut, and just getting battered on the jaw with the left hook every time he did it. Frazier would get to the ropes, and he'd hang his head low, and he'd say, come on, hit me, hit me, hit me, and then Ali would start loading something up, and bang, in the jaw with the left hook. So punching down, or convincing the opponent to punch down, very good. Punching down itself, very bad. Not such a big deal in in competitions where kicks are allowed. Ross Pearson is still very good at it, actually. He is very good at getting down low, convincing opponents to punch at him, slipping to the inside slip, generally more dangerous because you're slipping towards the opponent's right hand, but he's just masterful at it. He'll slip to the inside of the jab, and he'll come back with the left hook and just lay dudes out. Very impressive stuff. But you'll notice that Ross Pearson has a lot of trouble when the opponent starts throwing, not even head kicks, middle kicks. If they throw a few middle kicks, he starts realizing, can't put my head down there. And he starts to stand a lot more upright, and his upright game is just not nearly as polished as his slipping and counterboxing game. So you see guys like Cub Swanson throw a few crazy kicks at him, and suddenly he's standing upright, and Cub Swanson's hitting him with right hands that, better punchers or better boxers haven't been able to. So if you treat getting inside of the opponent's reach by head movement or checking the hands or coming in behind the lead knee, what's called tobikomi in karate, probably has a different name in Muay Thai, but there's a couple of good fighters at that. If you treat that and convincing the opponent to punch down on you as one side of the coin, the other side of the coin would be to convince the opponent to give up his reach by acting as the aggressor. This is done pretty simply by just moving backwards, laterally. Anytime you can get the opponent to chase you, if he is the taller man, you can convince him to overcommit. Think about it in terms of if you were walking along in front of someone and you stopped abruptly and they walked into the back of you and fell over and you laughed because that's hilarious. That's what you're thinking here. It's very easy to get someone to collide with you if they're walking at you the entire time expecting you to retreat. This happened just the other day in Holly Holm versus what's her name, Valentina Peru Shevchenko. That's the one. Valentina Shevchenko. Every time Holm attacked, Valentina Shevchenko would take a step back. Holm started overcommitting, and when Valentina Shevchenko didn't step back, she'd just nail her with the hook, or try a spinning back fist or something crazy like that. But the difficulty of closing the range was taken away from Valentina Shevchenko because Holm was so keen to close the range herself. An example from boxing would be Manny Pacquiao versus Antonio Margarito. Pacquiao did a lot of backpedaling in that fight, and Margarito would walk forwards, and then Pacquiao would, rally off 5 or 6 blows and duck out the side door, and it was just perfect. That was Pacquiao sort of, well, probably not at his best, but my favourite Pacquiao was the Pacquiao who was acting as the counter-aggressor, the guy getting the other people to come towards him, ducking out the side door after his attacks, perfectly following the pattern of offense. But a less boxing-related one would be Lyoto Machida, who literally, the whole early part of his career, he refused to be the aggressor. In fact, I think he probably got worse as a fighter when he started being more aggressive, when Luke Rockhold was able to check hook him over the back of the head, because he's just not that great in terms of his kickboxing form. But what he's very good at is timing very basic techniques perfectly. And he does this by backtracking and allowing the opponent to advance onto him. He used to fight with a size disadvantage at light heavyweight, but because he could close that distance so quickly, partly through his own speed, but also partly through having the opponent walk onto him. And he even caught John Jones with that counter punch down the middle, the Hyakuzuki, the reverse punch. That's what we're getting at here. You backtrack, you backtrack. The opponent keeps walking, and ideally, you want it at the point where the opponent goes, he's just running from me. How many times have you seen that in the corner of a guy with badly swollen eyes? Oh, he's running from me. Well, try cutting the ring. But obviously, it's not that simple. That's me being flippant. Anytime you see that happening, it's normally because the other fighter is performing so well with their game plan. So convincing the opponent to give up his reach by overextending is a phenomenal way to deal with a reach disadvantage. A final example, which doesn't really apply so much from the world to the world of boxing, but very much applies in mixed martial arts, is to use a longer weapon than the opponent is using, or to attack a nearer target than the opponent is attacking. For instance, we've been talking specifically about Nate Diaz and his specifically his long jab and his counter left hook / slap. We underrate the Stockton slap. I mean, we joke about it a lot, but he throws the leaning back right hook. My bad. We're talking about southpaw here. He throws the leaning back lead hook in exactly the same way as the slap. And if the guy follows him too tightly with their chin, he'll just slap them off balance. And then, later on he might catch them with the fist and hurt them. But as we're specifically talking about his jab and his lead hand, this applies perfectly. When McGregor was attacking with a longer weapon, the low-line side kick, for instance, or any sort of kick against a nearer target, Diaz's lead leg, he had great success. Because the reach advantage and height advantage work wonderfully for Diaz's jab. But they would work even better if Diaz was, a phenomenal side kicker. If Nate Diaz was a phenomenal side kicker, he'd be making the most of his height and reach, or leg reach. At any rate, it's like Bruce Lee used to say in his old interviews, because he really was onto quite a few good ideas, as much as everyone wants to go, oh, he was an actor. And yeah, he was. No one's claiming, well, some idiots are claiming that he would have been an amazing fighter, but he had some interesting ideas on martial arts on a philosophical level and on a scientific level. And what you've seen him say about the nearest weapon, the nearest longest weapon, the low-line sidekick, into the nearest target, the opponent's lead leg. If you have his self-defense book, it's absolutely hilarious. Just him in white flared jeans, demonstrating every possible scenario that the opponent could attack you. So we're not talking like, he could grab this hand or he could grab that collar. We're talking you're attacked at the grocery store, you're attacked getting into a car, you're attacked while leaning on a wall, and Lee's response to every single one is low-line sidekick into the knee. And his reasoning for that has proven to be correct. People cry about John Jones using his reach like the dirty cheat that he is. But using his reach so effectively by attacking the nearest target with his longest weapon as the opponent steps in. And it's just nightmarish for them. Of course, there are lots of other options. The round kicks of Muay Thai can be longer than the jab of the opponent. Most kicks, to be honest, are longer than most punches if you time them right, and especially if you go to the lead leg. So the other disadvantage that the smaller man will have is weight. Obviously, most of the time, fighters weigh in the same, but some rehydrate more than others. Some are able to effectively starve themselves of water and get to a much lower weight as a percentage of the weight that they will rehydrate to, and so on. But when you've got a man coming up a weight class, generally he will be the smaller man. And weight is one of the real key issues when you're talking about fighting, especially when grappling is allowed. To be honest, even in boxing, weight can be an issue. Just that mauling clinch, leaning on the guy, not even muscling him around, because that's more of a strength thing, but just leaning on a guy will tire him out. And a great example of mitigating this in the boxing world was Roy Jones Jr. In his one fight at heavyweight against John Ruiz, the quiet man, they used to call him. A lot of people called him the boring man. He was Don King's favourite for a while, but he was heavyweight champion. And basically, Roy Jones would rattle off one punch, immediately move into the clinch, and then to avoid being stuck there, or avoid Ruiz getting his hands free along the ropes, whenever the referee broke them, Jones would walk around the back of the referee. And I think George Foreman was on commentary for this one, or someone was, and they were just losing their mind over it. Like, why is the referee allowing them to do that? It was genius use of the referee. Roberto Duran used to do the opposite, which was he'd push his man to the ropes in the clinch because his man would feel safe with Duran's hands locked up. And then as the referee came between them and pushed them apart, Duran would stay really close, and the referee would just push the other man back into the ropes as he spread his arms out. And then as soon as they started fighting again, Duran would plough back in along the ropes and start battering him. But that's more sort of savvy use of ref. But the Roy Jones one was about keeping Ruiz out of the mauling exchanges on the inside. But to be honest, the weight thing, keeping weight off of you is the most important thing for the smaller fighter, and that can be done mainly by creating structure. One of the greatest boxers of all time was Henry Armstrong, Hammerin Hank, they used to call him, and he won, I can't remember which ones it was. It was the featherweight, lightweight, and welterweight titles. He won all of them and held them at the same time, and he even fought for the middleweight title, and a lot of people think he should have won that fight. So, and there were only 8 titles in boxing at the time, so he would have owned half if he won that fight. But he was amazing. Like he battered Barney Ross, who was a great welterweight, great counterpuncher. I think he was involved with the mob somehow. Might have been a friend of Arnold Rothstein or something like that. Anyway, basically Armstrong would get in on the inside, and he'd put his head underneath his opponent's, where you'd see a wrestler put his today along the fence, where you see John Jones do a lot of his best work in the infight. Henry would park his head underneath his opponent, keep him upright, keep pushing them back with his head to keep them up in their stance, nice and high. No stance, no power. And then Henry would get to work with just a short left hand to the solar plexus over and over and over again. And anytime he got a break in the action, he'd bump him with his left shoulder. Illegal, obviously, but bump him with his left shoulder under their chest to lift their head up and swing the right hand over the top and try and take their head off. He was a fairly dirty fighter too. Like, he butted and elbowed and all sorts, and he spent most of his time like looking down. He barely ever looked at his opponent, except when he was out in the open, and then he'd leap him with a left hook and then duck. And that was his method of closing the distance. But once he got to the inside, which is generally a position which favours the shorter man, but also favours the stronger man or the heavier man. But even against opponents who were 2 or 3 weight classes bigger than him naturally, he was able to keep their weight up, or up onto their toes, keep them in a short stance, keep them out of where they could build power, and get to work on their body, which was it's incredible to watch. You should definitely look him up, and I'll try and include some of his fights on the video portion of this podcast. The grappling aspect is where the weight will really tell, of course. In the original fight between Diaz and McGregor, Diaz said that he felt McGregor breathing hard when he hit him with a knee in the clinch or something like that. One of my original thoughts before the first fight was that while Diaz is the sort of fighter who will make the smaller man feel his reach, he's not necessarily the sort of fighter who'll make the most of a weight advantage. If you put McGregor in with Habib Nurmagomedov, sorry for butchering that name, but if you put him in with him or Rustam Khabilov, another butchering, and or any of those big lightweight wrestlers, they'd be embarrassed on the feet by him, but once they got a hold of him, he'd feel it, he'd know it, and that would be the real test on his gas tank, and just whether he can deal with the weight and strength of guys who are so experienced in the clinch at that weight. A couple of examples of grapplers who successfully mitigated the weight disadvantage are Kazushi Sakuraba and Marcelo Garcia. Sakuraba was an MMA fighter from a catch wrestling background, a real catch wrestling background, because a lot of people get sniffy if you say catch wrestling and you actually mean like some wrestler who learned some submissions or something like that. No, Sakuraba was a student of Billy Robinson, and consequently he favoured, rather than the guard, he preferred to get to his knees or back to his feet. And this involved turning his back a lot, and because of the meta at the time that he fought, fighters would immediately grab the back body lock on him, and he would start looking to break their hands apart and go for the Kimura, double wrist lock, sorry, catch wrestlers listening. And he successfully used that to catch a lot of bigger fighters, guys like Kevin Randleman, an enormously strong light heavyweight and heavyweight. And Sakuraba gets smaller every time the story is told. He's got a bit of the Helio Gracie about him, where each time you're told, he'll be like, oh, he could have made welterweight, oh, he could have made lightweight, he could have been a featherweight today. But, he fought around middleweight and he was chubby. That's all you need to know. And Randleman was a monstrously big light heavyweight, sometimes heavyweight, with a great wrestling pedigree too. And Sakuraba managed to submit him, which was impressive. He submitted Renzo Gracie, technically submitted Royler Gracie, who was smaller than him, battered Royce Gracie all over the ring, which was enormously enjoyable, if a little slow. But an example of a fighter who who mitigated weight successfully in grappling, pure grappling, against much higher level grappling opponents is Marcelo Garcia, who plays a lot of seated guard, butterfly guard from his rear, rather than De La Riva guard or one of the other guards that involves being on your back. He uses his feet on the hips a lot. He likes the butterfly guard because he can place his feet on the hips a lot and resist opponents' weight or keep their weight off of him. Very, very much worth a look. Not entirely relevant to this fight, but then he did popularise the X guard, and that's everyone's go-to when we're talking about the grappling of Diaz versus McGregor. Oh, but McGregor X-guard swept him. So yeah, definitely look up Marcelo Garcia, because the guy needs more attention. He's just one of the best to ever grapple. Had only a single fight MMA career, decided it wasn't for him because had a lot of trouble sinking in the chokes with the gloves and so on. But trains many of the best, and anytime you get to see a top MMA fighter like Ben Askren or someone like that go over to Marcelo's place and roll, it's a real treat. And I envy them for the opportunity, but I don't envy them because people online watch it and go, God, he's just getting tapped out so easily, not quite knowing just how good Marcelo Garcia is. But enough about general principles. I'm going to take a moment to watch the fight, and you guys can have a break from me. And when we come back, we'll discuss the specifics of the fight and the ideal game plan for both men in the rematch. Right, let's do some questions from Facebook and Twitter regarding my opinions on mixed martial arts. As far as tactics go on the feet, what are some of the things that MMA fighters don't do that you wish they would do? Oh, feinting. Number one, feinting. The number of guys who have made successful careers out of counterpunching dudes just as they run in is really high in mixed martial arts, and the way to throw that off is feinting. We can talk about Anderson Silva all day, about how he dominated the middleweight division for many years just by counterpunching guys as they stepped in. You can talk about him getting old, but the last couple of matchups he's had, Weidman and Bisping especially, both fighters who use a lot of feints, both fighters who stay on top of their feet, don't lead with their chins, those are the ones who gave him trouble. And that was mainly by feinting. That was stuff they were doing, not stuff about what great athletes they were or how far Anderson had fallen or all of that stuff. And of course, if you watch guys like Dominic Cruz or TJ Dillashaw, guys who are generally thought to be some of the better strikers in mixed martial arts, they throw dozens of feints. And they'll throw all sorts of different feints of different techniques from different limbs, or they'll start showing the same feint over and over again if they really want you to pick up on that one and then punish you with something else. Boxing is the place to go for feints. You know, if you're watching a really high-level boxing match, there's a lot of feinting going on, and there's almost none of it going on in mixed martial arts. Why does Jesus get more shout-outs and thanks than coaches? Yep, that's one that we all wonder about. I get that people want to thank God for all the good stuff that happens to them, but when you do it at the end of a fight, having just beaten someone up or knocked them out, it seems more like you're telling everyone that God hates the other guy. Never really understood that. It's a strange thing to do. Will the UFC ever get to a point where the belts change hands less often? I'm sure they're hoping they will. You need recognisable champions to sell your product. People love consistency. That's what people loved about Chuck Liddell. He consistently was knocking people out for a while and was the champion. That's what people loved about Ronda Rousey. You know, after she lost, Holly Holm got a bit of the rub. You know, the Rousey rub, got some fame off of it. But nobody, like in the community at large, nobody outside of MMA really gave a shit about who Holly Holm was, aside from the girl who beat Ronda Rousey. Anderson Silva's popularity was largely due to the fact that he never lost or wasn't losing. But ultimately, this is just a random period of turbulence. There's, you could make the case that maybe USADA testing has something to do with it, but it's, if only the challengers aren't being affected by USADA, then something strange is going on. It's just how things have lined up, that all the titles have changed hands around about the same time. Heavyweight's always going to be a mess. Demetrius Johnson is always going to be flyweight champion until the flyweights actually get to fight 5 rounds before they fight him. But the rest of the divisions, like, it's up in the air, you know. Are all these motherfuckers really on steroids? Yes. No. Yeah, it's a good one. I get a lot of flack online for my barely caring about steroid abuse now. Well, not steroid abuse. If you're using them and you're winning, you're not abusing steroids at all. You're using them correctly, aren't you? But I get a lot of flack online because I have such an apathetic attitude to them. But the more you learn about performance-enhancing drugs and the more you cover sports, the more you are just disenchanted with the whole thing. It takes a very trusting, or almost forced naivety to believe that all these athletes, sprinters, runners, all sorts, have nutritionists and a camp full of people helping them get ready and in peak shape, but they were all on their own when they went out and got the drugs. It's just not how it happens. So when you're seeing like Bolt's camp or Mo Farah, he had some trouble with a teammate getting caught for performance-enhancing drugs a while ago. When you see that and you go, yeah, well, they probably did it on their own. That's you're being very generous to your favourite athlete there. But ultimately, we'll never know. To be honest, I think the UFC is doing a very good job with their cleaning up the sport. Maybe not if they, the whole Brock Lesnar thing was super shady. But overall, I would say that the things are getting much better in mixed martial arts. There are leagues, especially professional leagues in America, that don't even really want to catch people. They, in fact, a lot of sports, the drug testing is more of a formality than anything else. You have to say, oh, we definitely drug test them, but we tell them when we're going to test them, and maybe we randomly test like 2 people from a team each year or something like that. It's there are a lot of sports who wouldn't want to burn so many bridges by actually catching guys and actually saying you will get caught if you keep using your performance enhancers. Let's go to Twitter for a couple. Hold on. What's the difference between MMA hooks and boxing hooks? Well, in boxing, a hook is a punch which is thrown in almost a circular motion across the body. In mixed martial arts, hooks are things that you put in from the back and then you secure rear mount and get the choke. No, mainly the difference is that there's an awful lot of swinging wide in MMA still, and you'd think there'd be less of it because of the uncovered second set of knuckles. Your door-knocking knuckles, they're uncovered in MMA gloves, whereas in boxing gloves you've got a little bit of padding over them, so you can land your hook however you want. I mean, it won't be a scoring area, if you're amateur boxing or whatever, but you can basically just throw your hand any which way and you'll have a little bit of protection. Whereas in mixed martial arts, if you start connecting with your door-knocking knuckles, you're going to hurt your fingers really quickly. So I don't know why people still swing so wild in mixed martial arts, but you see so many broken hands and broken fingers that you'd think that they would stop doing that. Any MMA, boxing, kickboxing rule changes that you think would make the sport more interesting? Boxing, the rules have been around for a long time, but it's the enforcement of them that is generally the problem. What I can't stand is when a referee immediately breaks the fighters apart when they clinch. It basically removes an entire segment of the game which was so important to so many fighters. We're going to talk about Henry Armstrong later. If any time his opponent had hugged him, the referee had immediately stopped the fight. Or Rocky Marciano, another great example. He was brilliant at freeing his arms and pounding away when the other guy thought they were holding on to him. Give the guys time to get their hands free, is my main thing for boxing. And don't get so touchy when their heads come together. Obviously, if their heads come together with some force, you've got to go, okay, careful with that. But obviously, the way to free your arms from a clinch traditionally, when they're overhooked by another boxer, is to get your head under theirs and jimmy it just in under their face so that you can make some space between the two of you and slide your arms out. I'll see if I can find some footage of Rocky Marciano doing that. Otherwise, I won't bother. For kickboxing, I would say maybe longer rounds. What I noticed at the Glory cards, I love Glory. I love Lion Fight and Thai Fight and all those sort of things. But especially Glory, I noticed that the rounds are over very quickly, and it doesn't help you get the knockouts that you want to advertise your sport. K1, the whole K1 kickboxing thing was developed to secure more knockouts, basically. The absolute ban on the clinch was so that people couldn't tie up when they were hurt, which is an issue all of its own. Especially when you see guys like Gary Goodridge and what an awful state they're in now. It's very sad. but I was watching a glory fight in Tokyo. It was Yoshihiro Sato, however you want to say his name, probably Sato, against some Korean guy in front of a Japanese audience, and they were all on Sato's side, but every time the two came close, Sato would be grabbing the clinch and trying for some clinch knees. And this was when Glory had it was a 3 count rule or something like that. You could hold for 3 seconds, and the referee kept counting 1, 2, 3 in English, which was hilarious. And then the crowd started counting along with him, and every time he broke it, they went way. And Sato succeeded in turning an entire Japanese crowd against him by exploiting the clinch rules. So I think you've either got to allow all the clinch, or you've got to completely ban all of the clinch with your kickboxing. It's a tricky area. But then if you ban it, you've got people going, oh, well, that's because the Thais would come in and mop up. And if you allow it, it can be quite alienating for the audience. Do you think Robbie should have tried not getting knocked out? Jesus Christ. If you didn't see this, because you don't watch the post-fight press conferences, I don't. It's just awful watching those. I've been to them, and mainly in European events, actually, but what you'll notice is that it's just full of guys who are going, Dana, when are you coming to, former Eastern Bloc country? And he goes, oh, we're looking at that. We're going to be there very soon. But yeah, press conferences are just generally awful. But this guy asked Robbie Lawler, obviously, Lawler, you dropped your hand and Tyrone Woodley came over the top with the right and knocked you out. Did you think about keeping your hand up? And the guy said it with an absolute, I don't know, maybe it was comedy, but the delivery was absolutely deadpan. And props to Lawler, he didn't lose his temper. I think almost everyone else would have. He gave the guy a serious answer. He explained that he went to parry the jab and he thought a takedown was coming or something like that, and he dropped his hand and he got caught. But that guy didn't deserve a serious answer. That guy should have been, thrown out, because it's just a moronic question. But you gotta if you get your press pass, you've got to stand up and do a question. Otherwise, what was the point in going? The free buffet, in my case, that's what I always enjoyed. Oh, and I forgot to mention on that question about rule changes, mixed martial arts rule changes that I would love to see. Firstly, I'd probably like to see the smaller cage for more fights. I feel like that produces a lot more action. It makes the job of the guy trying to cut the ring a lot easier. Because the octagon's corners are so shallow. The one that everyone will agree with, I'm sure, is knees to the head on the ground, or at least change the definition of that. Can't stand guys who just put their hand on the ground to avoid the knees. Obviously it's the right thing to do, exploit the rules in that way to avoid getting kneed in the head, but it does sort of feel fake. Knees to the head from the north-south was an absolute favourite of mine in Pride. I used to love that. I can understand why you can't allow soccer kicks and stomps in mixed martial arts. They are their own interesting aspect of the game. There is technique to them. There is technique to dealing with them. Pretending that just degenerates the fight into a crapshoot or some kind of wild brawl is disingenuous, I feel. But also, we can't have it for the same reason that we don't have small joint manipulation. It's not that it doesn't work. It's that it would wreck fighters very, very quickly, and we'd have guys just shambling about by the time they were 30. It would be awful. Just a quick note before we go on. I won't be using any of the UFC's footage in this video. I'll be trying to use more screenshots in future episodes. I've got a couple in this one, but they're not great. If you want to watch a video with footage of Conor McGregor that I have made, I highly recommend going to YouTube and typing in Jack Slack's Ringcraft. That will take you to a video that I made with the guys at Vice, and it's sublime. I can't really say much more than that. Go watch that and then come back. Right, the story of the first fight, for me, having rewatched it, is that Conor McGregor is obsessed with his left hand, to his detriment. Where he normally fights orthodox fighters and benefits from being a fairly rangy featherweight, he really struggled, and he was craning to connect these left hands on Nate Diaz. And while he was in the early going, it was clearly consuming a lot of energy and was exposing him to counter right hooks and jabs. A quick moment here just to differentiate for people who haven't read my work or the work of any other leading... I don't like calling myself an analyst, but analysts or fight writers or people like that. Open guard versus closed guard. Closed guard is when an orthodox fighter and an orthodox fighter meet, or when a southpaw fighter and a southpaw fighter meet. Open guard is when a southpaw and an orthodox meet. It's that mismatch of stances. In any closed guard engagement, the lead hand of both men is going to be the keystone punch. That's the one that occupies the center line straight down the middle of the opponent's guard when you're lined up correctly with each other, in front of each other. In a southpaw versus orthodox engagement, it's both men's rear hand, which makes it a sort of higher stakes game, with each man trying to get his lead foot outside of the opponent's to score that quick rear hand straight down the middle. Obviously, there's a lot more to the game than that, but those are what are termed the keystone punches. They're building blocks. And if you watch Conor McGregor's featherweight career in the UFC, you'll notice that he lands an awful lot of long left straights right down the middle of the guard, just down the pipe, and that's how he finishes a lot of his fights, and that's how he hurts a lot of his opponents. The back skipping counters that he often uses, which they hadn't been working too much recently. He'd been going into more of an offensive role in recent fights because opponents weren't going to run at him like Marcus Brimage made the mistake of doing. But obviously, Jose Aldo did actually make that mistake, got wound up by either what Conor McGregor said or the few strikes he threw out just before that, and lunged at McGregor and got clipped with the left hand backpedaling punch. Not really an option against an opponent who has a reach and height advantage. Very, very tricky to backstepping punch someone with those advantages over you. So McGregor took the initiative in this fight. He went on the lead. And they showed that ridiculous statistic, time moving forward, and McGregor had 42 and Diaz had 8%, and you were just thinking, so is 50% of the time both of them are moving backwards away from each other? It's a very strange statistic to keep track of, but important to the game nonetheless, because otherwise Mike Goldberg doesn't have anything to read. But in this Diaz versus McGregor matchup, it was McGregor's first fight in a closed guard engagement against another high-level striking southpaw that I can think of off the top of my head, at least. I believe Dustin Poirier is a southpaw too. Yes, he is actually. But he's not a guy who... He is another guy who is used to being against other orthodox fighters and uses his left hand a lot. He's not a particularly stylish or crafty guy on the feet. He's a very big hitter. But Nate Diaz is a fighter who, even though he is a southpaw, tends to focus on using his lead hand anyway against orthodox fighters. So coming into this match with McGregor, he had all of that lead hand expertise, and McGregor didn't really seem to use his lead hand much at all. A great example of this in the boxing world was when Manny Pacquiao met David Diaz. Everyone was wondering what this left-hand heavy southpaw could do against another southpaw, and Pacquiao rose to the occasion. He was doubling up on his lead hand, tripling up on it. It was really impressive, actually. And it would have been nice to see McGregor use his lead hand more, because the disadvantage of using your rear hand against a longer, taller opponent anyway is considerable. It meant that he was having to react and time it over the top of Diaz's punches, and it also meant that he was trying to close the distance with the shortest of his limbs. Obviously his legs would be longer, his kicking attacks would be longer, and his right hand would be nearer to the target. So his left hand is probably the furthest away, shortest limb that he could use to try and get in on Diaz. So it was a real effort he was putting in to trying to connect it, and he did. To his credit, he was connecting it a fair bit in the early going. The other thing that really stood out was that he was playing a very reactive forward-moving game. Where previously he has been using pressure excellently to wilt guys with those body kicks and things like that, and then jump back with the counter when he needs to, he was moving forward and constantly waiting for Diaz to throw something so that he could jump in with the left hand over the top. And of course, the way to defuse any counter fighter, you will remember, is to feint. Anytime you can feint out a counter fighter, that firstly, they don't like showing you their intentions. Secondly, they don't like being made to look silly. And what will happen is most counter fighters will start to take their finger off the trigger. They can't be on that hair trigger waiting for the counter anymore. And that's when their reaction's slow and you can typically catch them. You'll notice that almost all of the times that McGregor was caught clean in the first and second round was when Diaz either rolled his hands in what's called milling or feinted a jab at him, and then McGregor would duck down to the side. And every time that he got caught clean, it was while he was down in a lean. But that's the danger of reactive movement rather than, as we mentioned earlier, just the habit of moving your head all the time. When you watch McGregor advancing and you compare it to, say, Tyson or Julio Cesar Chavez, McGregor is moving his head anticipating punches, or trying to anticipate punches, whereas Chavez and Tyson were just in the habit of moving their head constantly. Everyone knows that Nate Diaz's lead leg is an easy target most of the time. Same with Nick Diaz. They're quite different fighters in their boxing form, but both of them have that lead foot turned in stance, very side on. McGregor went to that quite often early. He was using an oblique kick with his left leg. I would have preferred to see a round kick from him because that is the one that unbalances Diaz so badly because of the way that his toes are pointed. If you kick into the back of the calf or ankle or hamstring on the lead leg when it's turned across the body like that, it will slip out from under the fighter. You'll remember that Benson Henderson was able to knock Diaz off of his feet several times. And if you're looking to get in with a left hand or something like that, unbalancing a fighter with a kick to the lower leg or the hamstring and knocking their lead leg across their body is a fantastic way to get some time to do that. The straight line kicks to the knee were nasty looking, to be honest. There was a side kick from an orthodox stance by McGregor, which looked brutal. It landed and put lateral pressure on Diaz's knee against the floor, which really didn't look pleasant. Of course, the other great disadvantage of the closed guard engagement is that every time McGregor throws his left hand, Diaz's lead shoulder can be in the way, whereas in the open guard engagement, there is no solid bone in the way. There is only the opponent's hand or guard. And Diaz is a fighter that loves rolling behind that lead shoulder and loves leaning back with counter hooks. So even a lot of the punches that looked like big connections were in fact rolled with by Diaz, and he took a lot of the heat off of them by moving in the same direction and anticipating them. One of the effective techniques of McGregor was the uppercut, which was fairly surprising because Diaz is obviously the taller man, and often fights in quite an upright posture, but his team, McGregor's team, had obviously noticed that Diaz does like to duck his head off to the side when he steps in. So there were a couple of really good left uppercuts in there. Kavanagh was calling for the right uppercut. I think I saw one of those sneak in, but it was clearly something that, like I said, McGregor's right hand was almost pinned to his side at several points in the match. And with that rolling of the lead shoulder and McGregor reaching so far after Diaz as he leaned back, what you saw was a lot of Conor McGregor sort of leaning out with his chin way out in front of him, and his balance all off kilter, his shoulders way ahead of his hips. And if you watch that footage of him sparring that boxer, it caused a lot of drama online because someone edited one way and then the other person's camp edited the other. But if you watch the actual sparring, you'll notice that McGregor is leaning into his left hands a lot, and against a very good boxer, that was returned with jabs and all sorts of other nasty stuff. If he got caught lingering there, which is perhaps a bad habit from when he had the reach advantage on his opponents. One thing which got McGregor into trouble right at the end of the first round was his use of an inside low kick to the inside of Diaz's lead leg. This is something that generally probably not a good idea against the Diaz brothers, because their lead leg is always already turned in. You're essentially kicking into the shin anyway, but they're very good at picking up and checking on that side. And Diaz did in fact pick up his leg and picked up a single leg takedown off of it, and that led into the famous X-guard sweep and then some upside-down closed guard from Nate Diaz before the end of the round. Interesting exchange, but just it's never really worth kicking straight into someone's shin if it's pointed that direction. From Diaz, I really enjoyed his leading back right hooks. It was a very dangerous game, obviously. Like he said, he had to get his timing in, and to be honest, I believe him for a decent extent, because he was leaning back and getting clipped with the left hands, and then later in the round he was leaning back and not getting clipped with the left hands, but clipping McGregor with the slap or the right hook. His 1-2 looked crisp as ever. When he feinted McGregor into the lean and caught him leaning, those were the ones that really hurt him. I really enjoyed Diaz's body jab, which folded McGregor in half on a couple of occasions, but obviously very dangerous if the uppercut is becoming a problem, which it did from McGregor towards the end of the first round. Something worth noting about Diaz generally is that he does use his lead leg to kick quite well. Just small inside low kicks, but also a nice push kick to the body, which I really liked in this fight, and McGregor didn't seem to have an answer for it. Certainly, if McGregor is going to keep walking forward, it might be an idea just to put the body kicks in. He's unlikely to go for a takedown, and of course, retracting the leg and throwing out the jab has always been a good counter to aggressive opponents. Semi Schilt had tremendous effect with that, getting his opponents to run in as his kick came back and tagging them with the jab on the way in. In terms of hypothetical game plans, I would obviously love to see more right hand work from McGregor. Developing a dexterous right hand is very important for a southpaw if he intends to fight other southpaws at any point. Round kicks to the lead leg are obviously another part of the game plan that I'd like to see. I felt like McGregor's work in the clinch was actually pretty good. He did a great job of controlling Diaz's wrists and breaking his hips offline immediately when along the fence. And it is doubtful that Diaz will go to the fence much anyway because he had so much success in the boxing, or probably felt that he did. Getting Diaz to raise his lead leg for a check would give McGregor time to get in on a left hand. While the Diaz brothers are known for their conditioning, they are not known for their ability to take a body shot. Perhaps they can very well, but most people don't even bother trying. I used to say years ago, when Nick Diaz was fighting regularly, that there's no point aiming for a Diaz brother's head and hoping to be the first man to knock them out, when so many others have absolutely failed. Far better to build a game plan on going the distance and trying to wilt them in that time. Circling, picking at the lead leg, landing powerful shots when they get frustrated and walk forward. Playing the bully is not really the role for the smaller man. And McGregor could of course benefit from more feints. Diaz leans way back whenever he senses the left hand coming. Double jabbing in, or feinting the left hand and then throwing the left hand again once Diaz has already achieved his leaning position, would give McGregor a great chance of catching Diaz deep in the lean. This is how Sugar Ray Robinson knocked out Randy Turpin. This is how Anderson Silva got caught by Chris Weidman. Obviously, Nate Diaz is going to be hiding behind his lead shoulder if possible, but feinting him back and then attacking from an advanced position rather than reaching deep for the left hand and getting caught in the jaw with the check hook on the way in is obviously a better idea. For Diaz, I would love to see more low kicks, more body kicks. There's very little threat of McGregor taking him down, we feel. Unless McGregor comes in and decides he wants to put a jiu-jitsu clinic on a much bigger man. While Nate Diaz isn't known for his work along the fence, he did a decent job against Dong Hyun Kim, and if he can emulate any of his brother's work along the fence, using his head to prop the opponent upright, just as we mentioned Henry Armstrong doing earlier, and then digging to the body with both hands, he could easily wilt McGregor very early on. As this is a 5-round fight, I would love to see both men commit to attrition tactics and look to get the stoppage in the later rounds. Both men could certainly benefit from feinting more though. Diaz could also benefit from feinting, as he caught McGregor so effectively when he was slipping. Personally, it's hard to see this match going very differently from the first one, unless one man decides he wants to grapple. McGregor is always going to be about his left hand, Diaz is always going to be about leaning back and trying to counter with his lead hand or the 1-2. If it's anything like the first, we'll be in for a treat. And that'll about wrap us up for this week. This has been an experiment in podcasting. As I said at the beginning, I don't really have any experience in this field. Give me a shout in the comments for anything you'd like me to improve. I'm going to cut down on the ums and ers next time, hopefully. If you can think of a decent name for the podcast, definitely give me that. I need any ideas you can give me. And hopefully next time we do this, we'll introduce some segments where we look at old fights or some of the other fights on the card. And we'll keep the principles section a little bit shorter. I'm Jack Slack. I hope you've enjoyed this. Have a great week.